A dentist pressed 2 fingers against a 24-year-old woman's jaw, and her jawbone came apart inside her face. He pulled it out through her mouth, whole, while she was conscious. Her gums had been leaking pus for months. Her breath smelled like something already dead, and the official cause, written down by a doctor, was syphilis. She had never had syphilis. 5 years earlier, this woman had walked out of every shift at her job glowing, her skin, her hair, her clothes, glowing faintly in the dark, all on its own. She thought it was the best job she'd ever had. The substance making her glow was radium. Her employer handed it to her by the gram and told her to put the paintbrush in her mouth hundreds of times a day to keep the bristles sharp. In the next room, the company's own chemists handled that same radium wearing lead aprons behind lead screens with metal tongs because they knew direct contact with it could kill them. Nobody told her that. By 1927, more than 50 women who did this exact job were dead, dying, or watching their bones snap on their own while they slept. The company had a report proving all of it, 2 years before any of this became public. They didn't release it. They rewrote it and sent the fake version to the government. What happens to these women, the radium girls, and to the men who buried that report, is the story you're about to watch. And the same chemical playbook, the exact same one, is happening again right now, with a substance that's already in your blood. Her name was Mollie Maggia, 24 years old. In 1917, she took a job at the US Radium Radium Corporation in Orange, New Jersey. The job was painting numbers onto watch dials and instrument panels with a special paint. A paint that glowed. Not reflected light, actually glowed on its own in a pitch-black room. The girls loved it. At the end of a shift, they'd be covered in a fine dust from the paint, and when they walked home in the dark, their hair, their clothes, their skin glowed faintly, like they were lit from the inside. They called themselves the Ghost Girls. They thought it was glamorous. Some of them painted their nails with it. One girl painted her teeth, just so she could surprise her boyfriend with a glowing smile in a dark room. Nobody told them not to. The paint was called Undark. It was made from radium. Yes, that radium, the element the Curies had discovered, the one that was, at the time, considered almost magical. Radium was put into tonic water, into face cream, into chocolate. People genuinely believed it was good for you. To paint these dials, the girls used tiny brushes made of camel hair, and camel hair brushes lose their point fast. After 2 or 3 strokes, the bristles splay out, and you can't paint fine numbers anymore. So the supervisors taught every new girl the same trick on her first day. Lip, dip, paint. Put the brush in your mouth. Use your lips to twist it back into a point. Dip it in the radium paint. Paint the dial. Then do it again. And again. And again. The fastest girls could paint 250 dials in a single shift. That's 250 trips to the mouth. Every shift. Every day. For years. Each trip put an almost invisible amount of radium onto their lips and tongue. Too small to taste. Too small to feel. But radium doesn't pass through your body and leave. Chemically, it behaves almost exactly like calcium, which means your body does the one thing that turns this from a small daily habit into a life sentence. It builds the radium directly into your bones. Radium-226 has a half-life of about 1600 years. Once it's in your skeleton, it is not leaving. Not in your lifetime. Not in 10 lifetimes. And it doesn't just sit there. It decays, constantly, releasing radiation called alpha particles. Particles that barely travel at all, just a few cell widths, but when they hit hard. All that energy dumped into whichever cells happen to be standing right next to that radium atom. If that radium atom is sitting in your jawbone, the cells it destroys are the cells of your jaw. Bone is alive. It's constantly rebuilding itself. But irradiated from the inside, around the clock, for years, it stops being able to repair itself. It starts to die, from the inside out. In the jaw, that meant abscesses that wouldn't heal, teeth that fell out on their own, roots and all, and bone that became so brittle, so eaten away, that a dentist could lift it out with his fingers. In other parts of the body, it meant something almost stranger. Women who'd done nothing more than roll over in bed would hear a crack and find out their leg had simply broken. The bone was so honeycombed with damage, it couldn't hold their own body weight anymore. And in the bone marrow, where your blood is made, it caused anemia so severe that some of these women died of that alone, years before anyone connected it to a paintbrush. None of this happened overnight. It took years, which gave the company a window. Years where they could have said something. They didn't. By 1924, women who'd worked at the orange plant were getting sick in ways doctors couldn't explain. Jaw infections that wouldn't heal, crippling joint pain, anemia. And the company's president, a man named Arthur Roeder, did something that, on paper, looked completely responsible. He hired 2 researchers from Harvard, a husband and wife team, Cecil Drinker and Catherine Drinker. Their job, examine the dial painters and report back on whether the work was safe. In June 1924, they delivered their report. It said the dial painters showed clear signs of radium poisoning. It recommended the company change its practices immediately. Roeder refused to let them publish it. And then, a different version of that report showed up at the New Jersey Department of Labor, the state agency whose entire job was to decide whether that factory floor was safe to work on. This version said the opposite. Every worker examined, it claimed, was in perfect health. The Drinkers never wrote that. Someone at the company had taken their report and rewritten the conclusion and sent the fake version to the government regulator. It was only caught by accident. Alice Hamilton, a Harvard professor and the first woman ever appointed to the Harvard faculty, who had spent her career pioneering the field of occupational medicine, heard what the fake report claimed, and it didn't match what she knew the real findings were. She was a friend of the Drinkers. She wrote to warn them. By the time anyone could do anything about it, more than a year had passed. A year where more girls kept lip-pointing brushes that already had their predecessors' fingerprints, so to speak, baked into the same vials of paint. The company brought in a second expert, Dr. Frederick Flynn from Columbia University. Flynn had a PhD. He did not have a medical license. He was not allowed to treat patients. He examined one of the sickest dial painters, a woman named Grace Fryer, whose spine was already starting to collapse, and he told her she was in good health. Then he turned to the man standing next to him and asked if he agreed. That man was a vice president of the United States Radium Corporation. He agreed completely. In December 1926, Flynn published his conclusion in a medical journal, in writing, for the permanent record. An industrial hazard does not exist in the painting of luminous dials. By that point, women Grace Fryer had started work alongside were already dead. Grace Fryer spent 2 years trying to find a lawyer, not because lawyers didn't believe her. Finally, in 1927, a young attorney named Raymond Berry took the case. Grace was joined by 4 other women. The newspapers gave them a name, the 5 women doomed to die. By the first hearing in January 1928, some of them were too weak to lift their arms high enough to take the oath. The judge had to allow them to be sworn in sitting down, hands in their laps. And the company's lawyers stalled, filed delay after delay, because every month that passed was a month closer to these women dying, and once they died, under the law at the time, their case would die with them. It took a newspaper columnist, Walter Lippmann, turning this into a national scandal to finally force a settlement. June 4th, 1928. Each woman received $10,000, a pension of $600 a year for life, and all medical expenses covered. It was called a landmark victory. Grace Fryer died 5 years later. She was 34. Her death certificate listed the cause of death as radium sarcoma, industrial poisoning, in writing, on an official government document, the exact thing the company had spent years insisting did not exist. The settlement in New Jersey didn't end the practice. It just ended it for those 5 women at that one factory. In Ottawa, Illinois, a different company, Radium Dial, kept going, and a young woman named Catherine Wolfe, who'd started the same job at 19, started getting sick the exact same way. Pain, a limp, a hip joint that was falling apart. In 1931, the company fired her. The reason they gave, in writing, her limping was causing too much talk. Catherine, now married with 2 small children, joined a small group of other dying former dial painters. Locally, people started calling them something: the Society of the Living Dead. It took years to even get a hearing. Same statute of limitations problem. It took a change in state law before the case could be heard at all. Finally, in February 1938, the hearing happened. Catherine Donoghue weighed 71 pounds. At one point, a doctor was asked about her prognosis. While he was answering, she collapsed, right there in the hearing. They didn't stop. They moved the hearing to her house. She testified from her family's sofa because she could no longer sit upright in a chair, while her young son played on the floor a few feet away. It's too late for me, but maybe it will help some of the others. She died 5 months later. She was 35. She died the day after the company filed its latest appeal. Here's the part that should actually scare you. 5 years after Mollie Maggia died, the woman whose jaw came out in a dentist's hand, the woman the company called a syphilis case, her body was exhumed. A medical examiner named Harrison Martland had spent 2 years building a case that radium, not syphilis, not bad luck, was what had killed these women. He wanted proof. They opened her grave. 5 years in the ground, and her bones were still radioactive. Every single sample they tested came back positive. The radium she'd painted onto watch dials between 1917 and 1921 was still in her body, still decaying, still active. 5 years after she died of a venereal disease, her bones couldn't lie. They were the proof. Now here's why this isn't just history. In June 2023, not 1923, 2023, a peer-reviewed study looked at decades of internal documents from 2 massive chemical companies, 3M and DuPont. The chemical in question is called PFAS. You've probably heard it called forever chemicals. It's in non-stick pans, waterproof clothing, food packaging, and according to testing, it is currently in the blood of almost every single person in the United States, including, probably, you. Study's conclusion? These companies had evidence their chemicals were dangerous going back to the 1960s, and they sat on it for decades, while people kept using the product, while their own employees kept handling it. The lead researcher said it outright. These documents show the industry knew and chose not to tell the public, the regulators, or even their own workers. In 2023, 3M agreed to pay over $10 billion over the next 13 years for PFAS contamination. DuPont and 2 other companies agreed to pay over $1 billion more the same year. That's not a settlement for something that happened in 1928. That's a settlement for right now. And the radium story isn't even fully closed either. In 2023, the government approved $90 million to remove 140,000 tons of radium-contaminated soil from the site of the factory where Catherine Donoghue worked. That factory closed in the 1970s. The contamination it left behind was still being hauled away in trucks 50 years later. The dial painters prove something with their own bodies, that a company can know exactly what its product does to a human being and decide that knowing isn't the same as telling. Lead aprons in one room, bare lips in the next. The chemicals change, the aprons change, the paperwork changes. The pattern doesn't. If this is the kind of history that actually changes how you see the world, there's more of it here. This is the sick history.